We're talking about classifying, adding, and subtracting polynomials. Polynomials sound intimidating because it's a big, scary word, but it's actually something you've dealt with already. So go ahead and get your date, your page number, and your learning target down, and make sure you get this stuff in your table of contents. You should have a reference sheet that you were given today in class, and this will help you. So you should already have like all of these key terms that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So you may want to jot down some extra notes, but basically a monomial is a term, any term. A polynomial is the sum or difference of monomials. Okay, so you've seen things like this before. For example, if I just made up a problem like 3x squared plus 5x to the third minus 15x. You've seen problems like this before. That's a polynomial where each of these things are terms. So like this is a term. This is a term. This is a term. And each of those individual terms are called a monomial. Okay, so the whole thing together is a polynomial. Each individual term is a monomial. Okay? The degree of a monomial is the sum of the exponents of all its variables. So the degree of this term up here is 2, because it's the only exponent that I have on it. So the degree of that term is 2. The degree of this term up here is 3, because it's the only exponent I have on it. The degree of this term, remember, this is an understood 1 if there's not 1 there. So the degree of this term is actually 1. If I had a monomial, a term with multiple exponents on it, then the degree of that term will be the sum of its variables. So, for example, if I had 4x to the third, y to the second, that's one term. I'll make up a second term just so you can see. Well, the degree of the first term, just this one, would be the 3 plus 2. This one's degree is actually 5. This one's degree is still 2 because it's the only exponent I have on it. A constant, which is just a plain number, for example 7, has a degree of 0. Now, the thing you need to pay attention to is that the degree of the whole thing, the degree of the whole entire polynomial, is the biggest degree out of all of them. So like, if I had something like 5x to the 5th plus 6x to the 3rd plus 2x to the 7th. The degree of the first term is 5. The degree of the second term is 3. The degree of the third term is 7. The degree of the entire polynomial is the biggest, so the degree of the whole polynomial would actually be 7. A polynomial is written in standard form when they're written in order from least to greatest. So the one that I just wrote up here in blue is not in standard form because the degrees are not biggest degree to smallest degree. So if I wanted to write that one in standard form, I would actually have to rewrite it and put the 2x to the 7th as my first term because it's the biggest. The second will be the 5x to the 5th, and the third would be 6x to the 3rd. So that would be in standard form, and it's just rewriting it so that the biggest degree comes first. When it's written in standard form, the number that's in front, this coefficient in front, is called your leading coefficient. So in this case, my leading coefficient would be 2. So that's just what all those little definitions mean. So we're going to identify the degree of each of these polynomials. Well, this one monomial, this is one term, has a degree of 2, 2, that's 4, because you would add them together. This one is an understood 1, so it has a degree of 7. This one has a no variable, so it's a constant, so it has a degree of 0. This one has a degree of 1, because it's like an understood m to the 1 power. Okay, then you have this fancy little chart that you're going to fill out. Okay, and this is the degree of each of the polynomials. So if the degree of the polynomial, which remember in our definitions we said, if the degree of the whole thing, or the degree of the whole thing is the biggest one out of all of them. So the degree of the polynomial is, if the whole degree is 0, then you're going to call it a constant. If the biggest degree is 1, then you're going to call it linear. This is just how we name them. each polynomial gets 2 words. They get 1 word from this chart based on degree, and then we'll talk about how they get a word from the next chart based on number of terms. So the biggest degree, if it's 0, it's constant. If it's 1, it's linear. If it's 2, it's quadratic. 3, cubic. 4, quartic. 5, quintic. Anything 6 or higher is called like a 6th degree, 7th degree, 8th degree, 9th degree, etc. So for example, if we look at these two, make sure you get them down. We're just going to talk about the degree of each polynomial. So first you got to figure out, well, to find the degree of the polynomial, you have to know the biggest. Well, before I can know the biggest, I have to know what the degree of each of those terms are. So if I went through this term, remember it's the sum of the exponents in that term, so this term's degree is 2. This term's degree is 1 plus 2 is 3. This one's degree is 2 plus 2 is 4, and this one's degree is 0. So the biggest, the degree of the whole polynomial would be the biggest. So the biggest degree is 4, and if I look back at my chart, we called that quartic. So this is one of the names whenever you're classifying a polynomial will get. So let's do the second one. The degree of this first term is 2, the second term is 6, the third term is 1. So if I wanted to name this based on the highest degree, I would call it 6. If I look back at my chart, that's a 6th degree something. We'll talk about that second word in a second. Okay. So now we're going to use our second chart to fill out the rest of this, to get our second name. The second name comes from the number of terms in the polynomial. And this is usually the easiest one to remember. If it has one term, like nothing else is being added to it, then it's called a monomial, which we've already talked about that. If it's got 2 terms, then it's called a binomial, and I remember that because a bicycle has 2 wheels, so 2 terms, binomial. Trinomial has 3 terms, so just like a tricycle or a triangle. Tricycle has 3 wheels, triangle has 3 sides, 3 angles, that kind of deal. Anything bigger than a trinomial is just generally called a polynomial. So using this, we're going to go back to the one we already had. We already knew that this top one was quartic because the highest degree was 4, but now we need to name it based on number of terms. Well, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, and according to this chart, based on number of terms, we call that a polynomial. So this one's actually called a quartic polynomial. That's how you name it or classify it. It gets 2 words. The second one's word, well, it's got 1, 2, 3 terms. So if I went and looked back at that, 3 terms was the trinomial. Remember, tricycle, triangle, trinomial. So we're going to call that a 6th degree trinomial. And that's how you classify them. This next part's really easy, and I'm going to briefly touch on it. You've already done this. Adding and subtracting polynomials is just combining like terms. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to combine like terms. Well, I don't need these parentheses because there's nothing being multiplied to it. So I can take them out, or basically what you're doing is distributing a 1. So it becomes 2x squared plus 3x minus 7. This right here, I'm adding these terms to it. It's like a plus 1 here. Again, that's not actually going to change anything behind it whenever I distribute that, but you can do that and get plus 3 minus 4x squared plus 6x, and then we're just going to combine like terms. Don't get this confused with your exponent rules. All I am doing is combining like terms, and in order to combine like terms, the exponents and the variables have to match. So that means I can only combine 2x squared with another x squared. 2x squared minus 4x squared is a negative 2x squared. 3x and 6x is a positive 9x. And then the other terms I have is a negative 7 and a positive 3, and that gives me minus 4. And you're done. But just to practice, Let's go ahead and name this based on degree and number of terms. So if I talk about the degree, which is the first word, the degree of this term is 2, the degree of this term is 1, the degree of this term is 0. The biggest is 2, and if you look back at your chart, that's called a quadratic. And then I'm going to count. I've got 1, 2, 3 terms, so it's a quadratic trinomial. And that's it.